Hello and welcome to episode 154 of My Circus, My Monkeys. So, I just got back from a conference and I really don't have the bandwidth to come up with an awesome topic of my own. So, I will be dipping back into my question bank from you, the listeners. Today, I'm going to unpack a question that begins with Dear Anne, I'm feeling like it's hard to build up the next cycle of leaders in my department. And it ends with what types of things can I focus on to truly adjust the culture? If you've been wondering how you can build up your younger folks into the leaders of tomorrow, or just how to change your team culture in any other way, stay tuned. Okay, so let's dive into the full question. Dear Anne, I am feeling like it is hard to build up the next cycle of leaders in my department. There's a group who have had a lot of experience and continue to be those we lean on. We need to let the next group experience more and develop their experience further. This seems to be tricky. It is tricky because people want detailed, absolute answers rather quickly than giving a person time to research. It is tricky because some of these newer staff members seem to want to be spoon fed the answers. It seems like they're quick to say, I don't know. I don't have that expertise. And while I agree that they don't, I also know the only way they're going to develop it is by getting in and working on this. If I or another experienced person do the legwork, then we will learn it and can give answers faster, and it looks like it's easier than it is. What types of things can I focus on to truly adjust the culture? That is an excellent question with many lovely layers, just like I like. So, first, I want to give a triple kudos to the letter writer. Professional development is one of the four main roles of a supervisor, so it's fantastic that you're actively trying to develop your newer team members. Second, I love that you're not just focused on general professional development, but rather you need to build up that next generation of leaders. It is far too easy to just lean into the folks who already know things, especially in stressful times. But you're absolutely correct that you have to do this because you never know what's going to happen. People get promoted to other departments, retire, or quit. So if you don't have someone ready to fill that void, you're going to be in trouble. And plus, we just need more leaders in higher ed right now, even if we don't lose any of our current ones. And third, the third kudos is that it's great that you're thinking about this from a cultural perspective. It is way too easy for us to blame specific employees, mindsets, generational gaps, or external factors when we face changes like this. But as I've discussed in many other episodes, you need to assess your systems and upgrade them to align with the outcomes you want. You are spot on here. So let's break down how you can do that, whether you're trying to create future leaders, increase engagement, or anything else from a big picture perspective, AKA culture change. So let's start with habits and patterns. This letter uses fancy, complex words like leaders, culture, and sure, there are many layers to those concepts. But when we are upgrading cultures, what you're really doing is aligning your habits, patterns, and procedures with your objectives. Habits, patterns, and procedures don't sound fancy, but they are integral to your success. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. We are on autopilot 95 to 99% of the day. When you're on autopilot, you're running on your habits and patterns. And those habits and patterns can quickly be impacted by formal and informal policies, as well as our procedures. As a quick reminder, the habit loop consists of a cue from the environment, the subsequent behavior, and then the reward for that behavior. That is all it is. Yes, there's cravings can become part of this loop, But generally, we're not running into the problem that people are craving random bits of information from you without some sort of catalyst from the environment, like a student asking. Remember, our brains are predictive. So if you've or your team member has gotten what you need, aka are rewarded by doing B when A happens, your brain is going to default to that option every time as long as you keep getting rewarded. And why wouldn't you? Your brain wants to conserve energy, so your brain tries to achieve its objective in the easiest way possible. Now, I will clarify that sometimes our brain, what our brain deems to be the easiest, is really just the best way it knows how to, but that's for another time. For example, let's say you get a cue from the environment, which is that a student asks you a question and you don't know the answer. So you go to your default behavior for that cue, which in this case might be to ask a resident expert in your department on that topic. Remember, the last part of the loop is the reward. When you asked, did they give you the answer? Yes. Then you just reinforced that pattern for you. Your brain was like, dope. We can 100% continue to do this because it gives us exactly what we need. Absolutely no need to do it a different way. But what if that expert stopped giving you the answer? Would you continue to go to them in this situation? No, right? That's because the only reason your brain has for repeating the same behavior is because it's getting something out of it. And in this case, quick answers. So let's just summarize this idea. You and everyone on your team are running on autopilot most of the time. Whatever habits and patterns are in your subconscious right now are what's going to show up as you navigate your day. If you and your team breeze through the day, achieving goals without frustration for yourself or others, then your habits are likely aligned with your goals and objectives. If you or others are left frustrated by those habits, then you need to assess what is not working and what is. And then you need to upgrade what isn't. So that rolls us into the next main topic, setting clear expectations. As you know from previous episodes, the very first element from the Q12, again, Gallup's engagement survey, is I know what's expected of me at work. If you're a supervisor, that means you need to assess whether you're being clear with your expectations. It's easy to project how you'd like team members to be, but you also need to make sure that you're communicating what those expectations are. In this letter, the frustration is because folks on their team want to be, quote unquote, spoon-fed answers instead of finding information themselves. So let's simplify this even more. Let's say you developed a manual and you gave it to your team members with all the FAQs for your department. But frustratingly, you notice that many of them still come to ask questions that are in that manual. Did you tell them that you expect them to look in the manual first, and only after looking in at least, say, 3 places, should they come to you if they can't find the answer? If not, you need to. I personally have been 100% guilty of not wanting to read something, maybe an email, instructions, a manual. And so I just ask instead. Why? Because it's easier for me, right? Now, maybe the person who sent the email or developed the manual is annoyed, but guess what? 9 times out of 10, they tell me anyway. So what has my brain learned? Just ask. Don't bother reading. And most of them are polite enough not to communicate that frustration. So there's not even any social cost most of the time. If you're getting frustrated with your team's behaviors, that's giving you important feedback. It's your job to figure out what's frustrating, why, and what needs to be upgraded. This might mean the official procedures for your office, informal patterns, or personal habits. If your team members keep asking for the exact answers when you want them to figure things out for themselves, you need to look at whether you've been clear about how you want them to handle such situations and how you're responding when they aren't following those expectations. That's the important second part. If you just get frustrated and tell them the answer anyway, you are still giving them exactly what they want. So there's no need for them to change their behavior, right? Sure, maybe there's a moment of discomfort when you act or say something that implies you're frustrated, but remember, they're not doing this to annoy you. They're doing it because that's what they've been unofficially trained to do. Even though I take the easy way out and ask people for specific information instead of reading the information in some sort of long form, I am well aware of the people who won't give me the answer and just send me back to the original document. In those situations, I go ahead and read the email or whatever because that's the easiest way to get what I need because I know that's where I'm going to end up anyway. But I'll probably still ask the other people because it's easier for me. And even if they are frustrated, they still give me what I want. This is where expectations and habits overlap. You need to be clear upfront about the behaviors and outcomes you want to see if you want your team's habits and patterns to start lining up with your expectations. This means you likely need to upgrade your habits, patterns, or procedures. If on autopilot, you just answer your team and are later frustrated, you need to figure out how to upgrade how you answer in the moment. If on autopilot, you answer their question, how can you automatically say something that will reinforce the behavior you actually want to see? Maybe something like, hey, Chris, where do you think you can find that information? And if they say they don't know, you can politely remind them of the possibly obvious place that it's in and then send them on their way to find it. But whatever you do, do not tell them the answer unless it's a legitimate emergency. Now, looking up basic information about your department and how it runs isn't necessarily about leadership. It's about meeting basic expectations. But it's a simple way to explain how expectations and habits collide. And even more importantly, it's a stepping stone to becoming a leader, right? Because you've got to know the basics to become an expert. So, how do we adapt this to developing leaders? Well, that's where we need to become very clear about our expectations. What identity does a leader need to have, and what specifically do they need to do to achieve it? As this writer puts it, quote, it feels like they are quick to say, I don't know and don't have that expertise. And while I agree that they don't, I also know the only way they are going to develop it is by getting in and working on this. End quote. Okay. So what specific behaviors and outcomes do you want to see? It's easy to use broad concepts like subject mastery, critical thinking, or complex problem solving, and even the term leadership itself. But what exactly do they need to do to get there? In this situation, what specific behaviors do you need from your team to get them to step up as leaders? And they do need to be specific because, again, on autopilot, no one is assessing each individual situation. They are going, and you are going, to your default behavior as long as you get the results you want. Now, you don't just want to stop giving them answers. You want to explain what you need them to do instead. If, say, they don't have the expertise, are you outlining how they can get that expertise? You need to be specific, but you also need to see where they might be coming against conflicting outcomes or goals or even just comments. So, say I've been told I need to answer students' questions as soon as possible. If asking you is the fastest way to get that information, doesn't it make sense that I wouldn't waste time looking it up when you're right there? But, or I should say, and if you just tell me, well, look it up, but be quick about it, that could be very frustrating for me. But if you explain that the best way to help students more quickly is by reading and learning the information in that manual so you can easily and quickly find the answers you need in the moment, now I or they have seen how those expectations connect together. What would be even more helpful would be to give me or your team members a specific deadline by which they need to either know all the information in the manual or be able to quickly reference it to answer all the frequently asked questions in your department. And again, you're reinforcing this by sending them back to the manual whenever they come to you for something that's clearly in there. You need to clarify when it's okay to ask, if it's okay to ask, for specific answers and when it's not. For example, if they have a student waiting in their office, can they just ask you so the student just doesn't have to wait? Or do you still want them to look it up as well? Unless, say, there's an emergency. And if emergencies are the exception, then what is an emergency? I mean, how many times do you get interrupted by folks who feel like they need your input because something feels urgent or like an emergency? Probably lots, right? But have you clearly defined what an emergency is for your team? In other words, what constitutes something important enough that it needs to be addressed now, whether that is via email, messenger, or in person? Now, the other thing to go along with this is making sure that your team has the information they need to be successful. And that's Q2. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. Now, earlier I said, perhaps you've designed a manual for your team, but what if you haven't? What if each time someone on your team needs information, they have to hunt all over the place? That's another systemic factor that's getting in the way of them being able to do their jobs well and mastering things so they can develop into leaders. Now, I don't want to pivot and go through the entire Q12 here, but hopefully you can see how we need to focus on the basics to change any sort of cultural norm. And what the bleep? Let's bring in Q3 as well. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best. So that's back to focusing on folks' talents, their talent themes, including how they're showing up in these situations. Are you having coaching conversations about what you want to see? So again, clear expectations and how they can lean into their strengths to be more successful and how those talents might just be getting in their way. If you're not actively coaching your team, you need to be, because that's how we hone in and get to those behaviors we do want to see more quickly. So I was also going to dive into some generational things here, but I think this is long enough, and that's enough information right now. Plus, while there are some generational differences for sure, I don't like lumping people together in that way for most things. You can be aware of generational trends, but I think it's better to focus more on individuals and their needs versus stereotyping how Gen Z or whatever are showing up collectively. Plus, when we start to compare generations, because of the habits or patterns we've developed from our own generation, we tend to think of the problem as, why aren't these kids doing things like we used to do them? And that presupposes our ways are the right ways, and they're just not doing them. And that means potentially we are trying to impose some unhealthy habits or mindsets onto folks who might actually have a better way of doing things. I mean, if we were nailing it, we probably would have solved some of these ongoing problems and we probably wouldn't be so exhausted, right? Okay. So this was a great question with a lot of layers. But as with most things, what we're really talking about is going back to the basics to shift your culture. In this case, to develop new leaders, you need to assess the habits, systems, and procedures that are causing the problem or frustration. Then you need to focus on upgrading them so they're in line with the goals you want to achieve. In this case, developing future leaders. And that almost always means being clearer with your expectations, tweaking your own habits, and making sure your folks have what they need to be successful. And finally, you need to make sure you're coaching along the way to make sure everyone's superpowers, aka talents, are helping them get where you need them to go. So you want to make sure those superpowers are showing up as superpowers and not being held back like kryptonite. So ultimately, this whole thing is about getting the behaviors and mindsets we want into our autopilot. So you and your team automatically get where you want to go, even when you're not paying attention, which again is most of the time. And until next time, stay strong.